Hello, everybody. I'm Susan, Curator of Education, and this is Museum of Glass's great friend and guest curator, Linda Tessner, who's going to introduce our fabulous speaker. So thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Susan. Hi. I had the great good fortune of being invited to curate a show at the Museum of Glass, and as soon as Susan and Rebecca called me and said, do you have any ideas for an exhibition? We'd like to work with you. I said, I actually do have an idea for an exhibition, and it has to do with artists that have looked at nature very, very closely and have replicated nature almost like citizen scientists. And I was very excited, of course, when the Museum of Glass agreed to do this exhibition. It was, great fun. But I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we couldn't do this exhibition without some very specific artworks. Joey Kirkpatrick and Flora Mesa's bird pages, for example, and their beautiful botanicals. I knew they had to be in there. I knew Malia Jensen's sculptures that started as salt blocks had to be there. And I also knew that we had to have Alexis Rockman's beautiful painting, Evolution, along with the glass insects made by Vittorio Costantini that were inspired by that painting. And I'll just tell you, in a few seconds, why this painting is so important to me. I met Alexis in 1995 in front of Evolution at the Portland Art Museum. I was the assistant director of the Portland Art Museum at that time. And concurrently, I got to know and befriend George Stremple, who is a very important glass artist. And George had just purchased the painting Evolution. So I've been working for George Stremple as his curator for about 25 years, and I got my start by actually going to George's warehouse, and he would pay me to sit in front of Evolution and just talk about it, just sit and visit about what we saw. So I've been looking at this painting for 25 years, and I will tell you that I still see something new in it every time I take a look at it. The reason it is so closely associated with the Vittorio Costantini glass insects is that George loved this painting so much he wanted to add to it in some way. He really thought of it as kind of a focal point for maybe a private museum someday. And many years ago, he asked me if I could he had heard from Lino Tagliapietra that there was a lamp worker in Venice that made glass entomological specimens, and could I find out who that was? Well, I did find out who it was. It was Vittorio Costantini. And we started by taking detailed photographs of all of the insects in Alexis's painting. We sent those to Vittorio, and Vittorio he was commissioned to make a set of glass insects based on Evolution. That was the first stage of a commission and a collaboration that extended to almost 350 glass insects. So this painting for me is very special, and I'm sure it's very special for you as well, since it's such an early masterwork, magnum opus. Okay, medium early. So anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Linda, and everyone at the Museum of Glass. What a trippy place to be, right? It's like a cross between steampunk spaceship and Dante's Inferno. Who knew? So, Linda and I've had a great couple of days just sort of talking about this painting, and when I was approached to do this lecture, I thought, what a great opportunity, because I made this painting 33 years ago. It's a very important painting to me. It was my first large-scale, it's pretty big, right? Large-scale painting, and it really defined the beginning of my career. I was very lucky to have the opportunity to make it, and that means money and support. And I'm going to tell the story of how I arrived at this painting. And the first thing I'm going to do is show the painting. I think the light levels in the gallery are terribly low. So one of the first things I want to appeal to the lighting committee, or whoever's in charge of the lighting in the gallery, and I think the lighting should be doubled, if not more. So it looks a little dingy, and I know it's not because I looked at it carefully when I walked in. So this painting is one of maybe 15 paintings I've made this size since then, and I'm going to talk about where it's coming from. as a kid growing up in Manhattan, this is me, not that different than things I'm going to show you in a little bit. Things I was doing last Friday in Connecticut, where I live now. I absolutely adore reptiles and amphibians, and all nature, but especially reptiles and amphibians, because they're so fascinating and other. I grew up in Manhattan, and you think, well, how is a kid from Manhattan obsessed with nature? And I always have this idea that so much of my career has been about longing to be somewhere else. And I find nature to be a refuge, a place of enchantment, extremely special, fantastical, and I love the history of science. And these are places that I frequented a lot when I was a kid. I was obsessed with the Museum of Natural History more than anything else in terms of this stuff, because my mom worked there, and she was Margaret Mead's assistant secretary. So let's just say she was down the pecking order. And she wasn't that fond of Margaret Mead. She loved her, her work and her ideas and her career, but I think she was kind of abusive. So I saw the image on the upper right. This is going to be a candid lecture, so I'm just telling you it's very confessional. I'm full of self-love and self-loathing. So I watched this blue whale being built in 1969. So to me, nature, wherever I go, and I've traveled a lot, I'll show you some pictures of that, nature has been a big part of it. Obviously, dinosaurs are very important to me. There was a period where I wanted to be a paleontologist, and then I realized I just wanted to draw dinosaurs more than anything else. And you'll see where that's coming from in a little bit. This is the old hall of, and it's unfortunate that, oh good, it's not cropped up there. You can see I carefully did all this type and information at the bottom of the image. So if you have your glasses or binoculars, this is the Hall of Late Dinosaurs, 1939 to 1992, when they did the big renovation, which I saw also, and that's a long story. And that's the same year that evolution was made. Another thing that's important to remember is that, or remember to know, is that my father from Australia, his older brother was a very enthusiastic diver and an early proponent of scuba, and took a lot of photographs. And this is one of his books that he made in 1974. And one of the things that really taught me a lesson was, if you have the resources, and that's another time I'm bringing up resources, because resources really give you the opportunity to do things other than thinking about making a living. He was able to go diving and do these books because he came from a wealthy family. He ended up being the mayor of Melbourne, Australia in the 70s, and that ended in disgrace. If you want to learn about that, go and Google it. I won't bring up the prostitutes or drugs. But one of the things that I loved about Irvin, who unfortunately died about 10 years ago, was that he was very charismatic. Obviously, to be a politician, you have to have some sort of, well, let's just say, some sort of charisma. You know who I'm talking about. He was able to do all sorts of things with his life that he loved, and it proved to me that you could do things that you loved. I did mention that my mother's an archaeologist now, and that's another example of someone who did what she loved. And then my father was a jazz musician. Here's an early drawing of mine from 1968, thank you. And I'm sure it had something to do with Yellow Submarine and watching it came from beneath the sea, and the fish tank I had, and all these things. So, you know, my work hasn't changed that much at all. One of the things I wanted to bring up is, you know, growing up in America before the internet, we had these TV shows, we had these magazines, we had these books. These are the gateways, especially for a kid that's, you know, not able to go out their back door and go poke around for frogs all the time. I mean, I went to camp and did a fair amount of traveling also, but these are the people that brought these things to life. Now, William Beebe's probably before, does anyone know who William Beebe was here? Okay, good. But he really was one of the most charismatic figures of the middle 20th century. He was so well known that the New Yorker magazine had a caricature of him that was a stock image. So he was a combination of, you know, George Clooney and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Very charismatic, loved women, fill in the blank. Rachel Carson, of course, brought the post-industrial toxins to the public and showed the dangers of pollution and pesticides and all these byproducts of the Industrial Revolution. So she's someone that loomed large in my imagination. Jane Goodall, of course, brought to our attention that animals had personalities. They weren't machines. They were emotional. They were just like us, which of course makes many people uncomfortable, not including me. And of course, David Attenborough, who is the grand old man of natural history, who I just love. I love this guy. I think he's great. I go back and watch documentaries from the 60s on YouTube. I mean, ZooQuest Guyana, ZooQuest Komodo, the, silverback gorillas, all this stuff. He's just been an incredible inspiration. And of course, Sylvia Earle, and I'm doing a little plug for myself, so if you can see that text box in the middle, she wrote the introduction to my last book, which is a project at the Mystic Seaport Museum that I'm going to show you, that's really the descendant of evolution. And she said, and I'll read it to you for those of you that don't know how to read, Alexis Rockman has a rare gift. As portrayed in this elegant volume, as if in dreams, he transforms knowledge about the nature of the sea and our impact on it into inspired and inspiring visual poetry. I don't even think we paid her to say that. So that was a huge thrill, and I got to meet her. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about travel and my work. And ironically, evolution was pretty much the end of a period of my life where I didn't travel. And after I finished evolution, I decided and was prodded by friends saying, well, you know, you're a great painter of nature, but you're really a house cat. You don't like to go out into the field and look at these things. And I don't really think you're an authentic naturalist unless you go to, well, why don't we go to the Amazon? So that's a trip that we did with my good friend Mark Dion and some other people right after I finished evolution. And here's a picture of us. I'm on the right, Mark Dion's in the middle, and Bob Brain is on the left. And Mark is a fantastic sculptor. That's a camp that we built on a river, the Essequibo River or Mazaruni. I can't remember what it says, but they're all part of the same Essequibo River system. And Bob is a fantastic photographer, and we went camping for 2 months in the Amazon jungle, Guyana, which is basically a tributary in the Amazon basin. And it was really a lesson in the struggle to see these things in person. It took sometimes days to see anything. There were plenty of birds flying around. We saw one jaguar for about 10 seconds, some other things, but it was really just showed how much hard work goes into getting pictures of this stuff that I've been gleefully painting, thinking how easy it was to see them. Little did I know. So since then you can see Guyana on the upper left. That's the same trip. I've been to the Galapagos. I've been to Rio Napo in Ecuador a couple years ago, Jamaica Bay. I love nature anywhere. It could be a puddle in the sewer. If there's something living there, I'm freaking into it. Again, the Galapagos. That's a wonderful marine iguana right before COVID. And this is me last week and the year before. Looking at turtles, and there's a ribbon snake with herpetologists right near where I live in Connecticut. So you can see that I have a through line in what I do, just in case you're wondering. I'm wearing a cat dog t-shirt on the upper left, holding a wood turtle. There's a box turtle below that on the lower left. I'm holding, as I said, a ribbon snake, a common ribbon snake on the right, and then the holy grail for me, a spotted turtle, which is my favorite turtle in the world. And I finally got to see one last week for the first time. So now I'm going to give you a tour of panoramas in history, and some of them will be familiar to you, some of them won't, and I'm going to just show you the prism, and I haven't changed much in 33 years. I knew all about this stuff when I started this painting, and that's what I was competing with, and luckily, I mean, I was, you know, peeing in my pants when I started this project, and I'll explain why in a little bit, but let's go through a little tour of panoramas, like world building, Bosch, right, heaven and hell, judgment, all sorts of stuff. No one knows what he's really thinking, but it is the beginning of high school surrealism and drug abuse. There's our Pope that died last week, my favorite Pope. And then the Sistine Chapel, which is a type of panorama, if you don't hurt your neck. Monet, right? These great, you know, cycloramic paintings of water lilies and willows and stuff, and that was really the sort of gateway to the 20th century and the idea of scale. Rivera and a recreation of the mural that was destroyed by Rockefeller in 1933, I believe. Let me see. 1933. He was commissioned to do a fresco about the triumph of capitalism and technology, and he snuck in Lenin and some other people, and it upset, the titan of capitalism, and it was destroyed. So Rivera went back to Mexico and recreated it here, thank God. And then Pollock, right, an early Pollock, that's kind of clinging to Picasso a little bit, but you can see the scale. Rudolph Zallinger's great mural at the Peabody Museum, which is a big inspiration to me since I was a kid. And again, this is something that's stuck with me for years and years and years. It starts out, it's a timeline from left to right, which I think is fascinating. And that evolution is not a timeline per se. There are parts of it that are a timeline. Things along the wall are basically a timeline. And then Barnett Newman, Thomas Hart Benton. I don't know if this goes down well in this culture, right? It sure is a pyramidal composition. And then, of course, movies. Now, one thing I want to say about movies and my history is that I always thought I'd be in the film industry. And with the invention of, I grew up loving horror movies and Orson Welles and King Kong and, Truffaut and all these different things that were really different genres. But one of the things I just wanted to bring up is evolution was really an attempt to make something that was the scale of the cinematic experience, right, with these incredibly panoramic images like Lawrence of Arabia. Then, of course, Rosenquist, which is, I guess, a panorama, even though it wraps around a whole room at MoMA now. And then, of course, Kubrick's masterpiece, which could be the greatest movie ever made, 2001, The Space Odyssey. That is bigger than us physically, and that was the goal of the painting. And then Kiefer, whose ego is unbounded. I've seen paintings of his that you could fit 10 evolutions on. I don't know who buys those damn things, but someone's pulling a fast one, and I want to know how. So now I'm going to talk about the history of evolution itself and how it came to be. So it's around 1990, 1991, and I'm doing fairly well. I'm making a living from my work. I'm showing. I'm part of the conversation. I had a show at the ICA in Boston in 1988. I was doing some other museum shows, and I met a young art dealer named David Lieber, who was working at Holly Solomon. And he was extremely interested in what I was doing and a very good friend and very supportive. He's now at David Zwirner Gallery, and he's doing fantastic shows there, basically art historical shows like Morandi and Albers and stuff like that. So David had just left Holly Solomon and started working for Speroni Westwater Gallery, and in particular, Genenzo Speroni. They were very close, and Genenzo Speroni is one of the grandfathers of modern contemporary art. He started showing post-war contemporary art in the 60s in Rome, and he eventually started a gallery in New York with Angela Westwater, who's another titan in the industry. They're both in their 80s now, and Conrad Fisher, who fell away subsequently over the decades. And they created this gallery called Speroni Westwater, and David was one of the directors there, and they showed Mario Mertz and Richter and all these fantastic painters and sculptors. And Genenzo, I'm going to just show, so you remember what I'm talking about here, right? Just so you know. Some details. So, the making of evolution. One of the things I wanted to mention was I, unfortunately, endured the death of my father in March of 1992, and it coincided with me beginning this painting, and I think this painting kind of saved me, or put off my grief, or some might say deflected my grief. I ended up having, if you have something to do, it can be very helpful in the short term in terms of coping with this stuff. So another reason that I think this painting might be so good, and I made it so quickly, was that I really had to hide from my feelings, which isn't a great thing for your girlfriend or therapy or any of that stuff, but it's great for art. So that address is where my studio used to be until 5 years ago. So here's a picture of Genenzo Speroni. He's extremely handsome, charismatic man, and you can see on the left, that's his collection in Rome, and he has like a Richard Long, a Julian Schnabel, I see a Clemente, I see something that looks like a Caravaggio, I see a Tom Sachs. So he was one of these guys that was European, that loved American modernism and post-war conceptual art, and managed to find a way to put them together. Like, he wouldn't mind having a Baroque bust of, you know, some senator next to a Saul LeWitt or a Judd or someone like that. And he came to my studio, and he saw this painting. And this painting, to me, was one of the biggest paintings. This was the biggest painting I'd ever done, 112 inches. And this is a tree of life, but instead of successes, it's failures, right? And it's based on Ernst Haeckel that I'm going to show you in a little bit. But the reason this is the first painting was he saw this in my studio, and he said, oh, yeah, I'll do a bad Italian accent. This is fantastic. However, I think I need one that is the length of this wall. And he pointed to my studio wall, which is about 27 feet, and he said, can you make something like that? And I said, okay. Thinking like, holy shit, I'm so excited, I'm terrified. How do I do this? Just say yes. He said, how much money do you need? And I thought, say much more than you are scared to say because you're not a good business person. So I said $70,000. In 1992 was a lot. And he said, okay, great. I'll give you $10,000 a month. Can you have it done by September? And this was, I think, February. And I said, great. I jumped for joy in a cold sweat and, you know, started thinking about it and thanked David, and they left. And I was so excited. And I'd already had a gallery in New York, Jay Gorney, which was a great gallery. But Jay wasn't in a position to do those sorts of things, and it didn't have the history of, you know, the post-war contemporary art world on its back. So I'm just showing another couple of paintings I made around that time as well that have an influence on evolution. And you'll see these trees of life that have metal on them, and the metaphor, well, you figure out the metaphor. I don't want to lead the witness. But these are all extinct animals. So you have the thylacine, the California condor, which is not, I thought it was going extinct, the Carolina parakeet, the stellar sea cow, and so on, the great auk, and so on and so forth. And this was my first attempt at dealing with this idea of passenger pigeon, trees of life that have failure on them, because I always felt really irritated. There's another painting that's panoramic that deals with, you know, the primordial swamp and stuff like that. I felt uncomfortable that these images had humans at the top as the apotheosis of success, when I was so aware of the problems that humans had been bringing to whatever else was alive, wherever they went. Death and destruction followed, including, you know, dozens of other hominid species that were either had sex with and then eventually absorbed or presumably killed and eaten. So I don't have rose-colored glasses about human activity, and I wanted to sort of deal with my feelings about this and the intellectual tradition of the skepticism of success. So I went straight to the Central Park Zoo and started looking at, everyone's seen this, right? You've been to New York, right? These are still there. And I thought, well, what if I have these islands, and these are islands of taxonomy, like insects go here, and reptiles go here, and so very loose, but just a way of starting the structure. Another important thing was this fantastic diorama of the eastern seaboard that goes from fields into a forest into the water. So you can see there's like this tradition of thinking about above and below, which I'd already been doing, but this again was like a geographic tour through the landscape. And you can see on the bottom right, there's a little log with an eastern painted turtle. And this looks like my neighborhood now in Connecticut where I live. So that's something that, this is one of my favorite dioramas besides the Akeley Hall of African Mammals. Another favorite from the Hall of Ocean Life. So my first sketch of evolution, which is not a particularly good drawing from my perspective, but it sort of just showed where the breaks in the panel were. You can see those vertical lines. And I moved the sun eventually to the left. And you have the fallen tree of life. You have those islands from the seals and the snow monkeys, the Japanese snow monkeys. And then you have this wall, which I'd been doing. And the idea that I was going to put things on the wall from various parts of history and make a sort of timeline along the wall. And then what was I going to do? It sort of started to develop as I made the painting. Here's one of the drawings of the polar bear that's on the back of the wall. I'm just sort of showing you a little bit. So I started the painting, and this is me in 1992. Starting the painting on the floor, and you can see that there's metallic silver for the sky and metallic gold, different shades of gold. So I sort of figured out where things go, more or less, and I was starting to sort of block it in with some paint, and this is the beginning. And you can see, if I go back a couple of slides here, how close this really is to the initial drawing, which is kind of surprising. Talking on the phone as usual, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, wheeling and dealing. I don't see many beer cans. It must be 10 a.m. There's a beer can. What is that? No, I don't, maybe. I hate Budweiser. Oh, I see Sapporo on the right. Those big silver. Yeah, that must have been 5:30. Oh, there's Budweiser on the left. I'm talking about the one under the ladder. That must have been the person taking, I have no idea who took these photographs. Yeah. So I faked that photo. The painting was already done. You can see the drawing on the right. I never noticed that before. See, peeking out from the edge that I just showed? I found that in my flat files about a month ago in storage, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy I have this. And there is the day the paintings are leaving with my assistant, Andrew, and we're breaking them into panels. Into the pieces. So now I'm going to tell you where these ideas and pictures came from. And again, it's going to go left to right. Just to remind you what it is. Here are the plants and animals in the painting. And I ended up doing this key, legend key, whatever you want to call it, which is a way of identifying specific things in paintings. Dioramas or illustrations. I thought it was a radical idea of applying it to this painting once I finished it, and then I had the unenviable task of figuring out what the hell I was thinking because I couldn't remember. So that took like a couple of weeks to figure it out. I did this because the Carnegie Museum was going to show the painting, and I thought that would be a really interesting thing to go along with it. So here's the Dimetrodon from the wall on the upper left. I'll show you. This is what this thing's good for. So, Charles R. Knight, baby, at the Museum of Natural History. I'm like, that is one of my favorite illustrations, paleontological reconstructions. Charles R. Knight was is the greatest paleontological illustrator, painter of the 19th and 20th century. He died in 48 or 51 or something like that. He was the guy that did the murals at the museum and the Field Museum and the La Brea Tar Pit Museum in LA, and did a series of paintings that are no longer accurate, but they're so full of life and personality. And I just think he's fantastic. And you'll see again and again that I love him. So you can see that this is a mosasaur, and then behind that is a mata mata and different types of snakes and stuff like that. So that's Reptile Island. And here's the mosasaur that I stole, quoted, whatever you want to call it, which is in the Museum of Natural History also. I love the water. And you can see that Knight is part of this weird collision of scientific information, and then you could tell he's looking at Winslow Homer also. And that's what's really fascinating to me. And I find these animals not only have so much spirit, they have so much specificity and life. I mean, they just look like they have personalities. Some sort of tarpedy-looking fish jumping to get away from them. The volcano, when I started this, I was like, every painting about evolution has to have a volcano, right? Frederick Church's Cotopaxi, one of the greatest volcano paintings ever. So that really became the background. I'll go back a couple of images. Whoops. For all this stuff, if you want to rip off the greatest volcano, you want to rip off a volcano, it better be the greatest volcano ever. Here's a little bit of self-quotation. This is on the lower left, on the waterline. A painting of mine I made about 4 years earlier that was huge. That was 112 inches also. And then the illustration that I got it from. Again, this is along the wall, and you can see two bandicoots having sex, a little Eohippus, and we were talking about Eohippuses. Where's Linda? There you are. The dawn horse behind the, that's a little horse before they developed hooves, Wallace's bee. So again, here's another Charles R. Knight quotation. And that's in the Field Museum in Chicago. I finally saw these murals in person a couple of months ago. Brontotherium. God damn it. And there he is, or she. So you can see, I'm like looking through the thousands of natural history books, I'm like, what's the best characters that I can put in this painting? The Silurian Sea, 300 million years ago, when Eurypterids and trilobites and all sorts of other things were lurking about in the muck. Zadok Burian, the great Czech illustrator. Who doesn't love pterodactyls? More quotation from the Museum of Natural History. Dunkleosteus, with a nudibranch swimming in front of it and some plankton-looking stuff. And then this drawing, which that is based on, and I actually own this. It's in my office in Connecticut. So that was a great thing. I ended up meeting Charles Knight's granddaughter and buying a handful of works on paper from her that I have in my office, which I love. Now you wonder, what the hell is that? Does anyone know what that is? Some of the best stop-motion animation. So there's me and the guy who did that animation in my studio. So I'm the type of person that if I love something, I find them and make them come to me, or I come to them. That's in my studio. I'm working on a project that I'll show you in a couple of minutes. That's me a couple months ago, and there's that turtle in the Field Museum in Chicago. Ray Harryhausen's terrible 1 million years BC with beyond belief great animation, and Raquel Welch, who doesn't love her. And there's me and Ray Harryhausen in 1994. Some other schmutzy microorganisms in early life. I see worms and plankton and jellyfish and all sorts of stuff. And then the sequence in Fantasia, Rite of Spring, to Stravinsky's fantastic magnum opus. So the beginning of life and life cycles of Earth and stuff like that. So I'm quoting all these things and thinking about that for sure. And then you have the tree on the right. And this is the beginning of my relationship to evolutionary trees, because you can see man is at the top. And I'm like, that's fucked up. I'm putting something really screwed up on the top in my version of this. There's a wonderful essay that Jerry Saltz wrote about this painting in 1988, 9, in Arts Magazine. If you're interested, you can dig it up. Other traditions of representation of nature, Wolpertinger in Bavaria, ridiculous taxidermy that's obviously by some drunken Bavarian going out with his gun and blowing his foot off. The bat rat spider from The Angry Red Planet, which I actually have never seen. I just love that photo, or that still from it. And then the rejected chestburster from Alien, which, who doesn't, I met Giger, that was great. So I wish I had a Giger. So you can see that I'm drawing from all my interests, and it became basically a clearinghouse, or someone said that I opened up a closet and all my ideas fell onto that painting, which was really true. And it was basically like the end of a chapter. And I really mean that with the utmost sort of tenderness, and I absolutely love the painting. You're wondering what this is. Well, it's this. John Hurt in Christopher Tucker's fantastic makeup for David Lynch, rest in peace, Elephant Man. So now I'm just going to give you a couple of images of where evolution has been over the years, and I wish, 80% of them don't have photos, unfortunately. But this is when I showed it for the first time at Speroni Westwater in 1992. This was in my first retrospective in Illinois State University. Barry Blindeman, great curator. And I love that Harvest, the painting that inspired this, is right there next to it. I think this is the Smithsonian American Art Museum, about 15 years ago. You need a bench when you see this painting. Maybe a hammock. This is at the Wexner Center. And here we are. I just want to give you a little bit of a roundup of where it's been: group exhibitions, solo exhibitions, monographs it's in of mine, group and books and group exhibition catalogs. So this, for years, became, until really 2004, and I'll show you some of the work that I've done after press. I'm going to show you paintings that sort of came out of evolution and for a number of reasons. I felt like that was something that I wanted to continue, and which I'm hoping to continue as of now. I'm talking to the Jewish Museum about doing a version of evolution, but about the Middle East, so in New York. So that's going to hopefully open in November of 2028, and it's the same size as evolution. So a painting that became a descendant of that is Manifest Destiny, which is about what climate change is going to do to New York City. And I spent about 4 years on this, talking to scientists like James Hansen. And you can see, if you look carefully, that's the Brooklyn Bridge. And this is a revamped Manhattan Bridge. And this is the East River bank, and that's Brooklyn back there. And I hired an architect to do drawings to show like what would seawalls look like that had failed and stuff like that. This is a tremendously challenging thing because there's a lot of different perspectival architectural renderings of specific buildings, and I wanted it to be specific enough so that you could see things that were familiar. There was a point when the new Nets Stadium, the Barclays Center, was going to be on the bank of the East River, so I put it there even though they moved it inshore. So this is part of the Wexner Center exhibition. And here, this is what it looks like today at the Smithsonian. So this is really a wonderful thing to have Thomas Moran's Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, which is a painting that I was thinking about, that I was aware of. You know, I obviously knew Church and I knew the Hudson River School painting tradition. I was thinking about this painting when I started Evolution. To have it next to it in the Smithsonian is a huge thrill. Then I went to Antarctica with my wife, Dorothy, on the left. And Linda and I were talking about our itinerary. That red line here is our itinerary from Ushuaia in 2007. It's on sheets of paper, so it's technically a painting on paper. I don't know. In different panels. Battle Royale is the painting that I was working on when Phil Tippett was in my studio, and that's now in the New Orleans Museum of Art. And it's a battle, and Genenzo came to my studio almost 20 years later, and I said, Genenzo, I have this idea. I want to do a battle of invasive species battling endemic native species. And he said, well, what does that look like? So I showed him a picture of X-Men fighting villains, and he's like, okay, done. So it ended up looking like a cross between that Jack Kirby drawing and the poster for Apocalypse Now. So you can see that on the right are all the endemic animals. Of course, our Lord and Savior, the bald eagle, brown pelican, black bear, alligator snapping turtle, alligator gar, paddlefish, and so on. Extinct Carolina parakeet again, alligator, and then things that have come from other parts of the world: domestic cat, reticulated python, these, I can't remember where these European wild boar, and so on and so forth. So I did this for Prospect 2 in 2011, and then the, excuse me, the New Orleans Museum of Art bought it the next year, which is great, where it belongs. Coming back to New York, I made a painting about all the animals that had been, or some of the animals that had been guests in the zoo, and somehow they'd escaped. And so that ended up being, I have a funny story to tell you. Does everyone know Crystal Bridges Museum? So Crystal Bridges basically bought this painting. And Alice Walton, I should never be saying this, but why not? Alice Walton shipped it out to Crystal Bridges and did an unveiling. And she said, oh my God, you have two animals fucking, and they're not the same species. So she sent it back. So I have a sense of pride and really fury about whatever. That's the danger I mean, if you're going to do challenging things, you're going to, break some eggs or something. There's me working on it. That's in the gallery. That's after the painting had just come back. Here it is at Future Shock in Site Santa Fe. Then I was lucky enough to be approached by Dana Fries Hansen, who said, I'm now the director of the Grand Rapids Art Museum. And I said, where the hell is Grand Rapids? And he said, look on a map, you dummy. And I did, and he said, what do you want to do that's big? I said, something about the Great Lakes. So we went and pitched this idea to museums in all the many cities around the Great Lakes before I started the painting itself. And this is me and Dana, we're still talking, in Chicago, at the Chicago Cultural Center. I think this is Grand Rapids too, right? Yeah. And then here's one of the paintings, not unlike Evolution in terms of density. And this is a timeline. You can see the Laurentide Glacier on the left that came down and made the Great Lakes. And as the glaciers were melting, it left a big puddle, and that's what the lakes are. So I made 5 of these paintings about different ideas and issues that the lakes have had to face. Here's another one, Pioneers on the left, endemic fish coming in through the Mississippi and other parts of other tributaries of the puddle. And then on the right, ballast water coming from that cargo ship, eggs and larvae of round goby, lamprey, mud shrimp, all sorts of stuff that basically have taken over the lakes. Zebra mussel. So here's an installation shot of 3 of the paintings, and these are 7 by 14 feet, so they're 10 feet smaller than Evolution, but they're big enough. There's me in front of Forces of Change. Then I was commissioned by the Great Lakes Science Center in Cleveland to do a painting about the history and future of the Cuyahoga River, and everyone knows what the Cuyahoga River was, right? It's the one that caught on fire and became a sensation that led to the Clean Water Act. Most rivers in the 19th and 20th century since the Industrial Revolution would catch on fire because they just dump, the industry would just dump their stuff there. And eventually some spark would come off of a train or something like that and it would catch on fire. Bless you. U.S. Steel, Sherwin-Williams. I was just watching the Cleveland Cavaliers game and they showed a shot of the city, and I've been to Cleveland a bunch of times, and there was a big Sherwin-Williams sign on the building, and I thought, that's so interesting to be talking about this painting tonight. And there's me in front of it at the Parish Art Museum. And the last one that is the descendant of Evolution is a painting called Oceanus that was a commission for the Mystic Seaport Museum. I got an email in 2020, just as COVID was unfolding, saying, we want you to make a big painting like Manifest Destiny. All you have to do is use our collection in some way. So I said, thank God, something's happening. And I'll show you. I ended up using the collection of boats as the driving engine. The top strip of this is on the left side, the middle strip is in the middle, and the bottom strip is on the right. I'll go back and show you. So up here is that first slide, then here, and then over here. So this is a history in chronological order of their boats, and it includes everything from Darwin's Beagle to the Amistad to all sorts of things. Now some of these are models, and some of them are actual boats. It's a really fascinating, great privilege to work with them. You can see the history of whaling, the 3 big pelagic fish that are really going to be extinct in about 10 years. This was just a computer model when I made the painting, but it exists now. Deep sea mining. And there's me working on it. And that looks a lot like that first image of mine working on Evolution. The thing that I want to and you know that because you can look at Evolution, but this is a physical, athletic job. It is a lot of work, it's heavy, it's toxic, there's a sense of urgency, things happen slowly and then almost instantaneously, it's like war. And I'm pouring stuff and doing stuff. I don't know what's going to happen a lot of the time. That's my studio in Connecticut. And so one of the things that I want to say also is that I am so lucky to make objects in this digital world where, you know, everything we do is on our phones or, you know, on some screen. And these are physical paintings. That's the same computer that's on the table over there. So here's a couple of installation shots, and you can see that boat in that little vitrine there is in the painting. And oh, sorry, it's right in the middle of the middle panel. So those were my pieces of reference. And there's that quote again.